Welcome to the Horror Hive channel, where the darkness and unknown come alive. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode of terror. Let's dive into the darkness together.
The night shift nurse. The old asylum loomed in the distance, its dark and brooding silhouette a stark contrast against the bright sky. It had been abandoned for years, but rumors persisted that it was still haunted by the ghosts of its former patients. Some said that the screams of the insane still echoed through the halls, while others claimed that the asylum was a gateway to another world, a place where the living and the dead could meet. Despite the rumors, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned asylum. They had heard the stories, but they didn't believe them. They thought it would be a fun adventure, something they could brag about to their friends. The teenagers gathered at the gates of the asylum, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. They pushed their way through the rusted metal doors, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they made their way through the dark hallways, they heard strange noises. The creaking of the old building, the shuffling of their own feet, and the sound of something else, something they couldn't quite place. Suddenly, one of the teenagers screamed. They had stumbled upon a room filled with old medical equipment, rusted and decayed with age. But that wasn't what made them scream. In the center of the room was a chair, its leather straps still intact, as if waiting for a patient to be strapped in. The teenagers quickly left the room, but the sound of footsteps echoed after them, following them through the halls. They tried to shake the feeling that they were being watched, but the sensation only grew stronger. As they reached the top floor, they found a door that had been sealed shut. It was the only door in the entire asylum that had been barred, and they were curious to see what was behind it. With all their might, they managed to break the door down, revealing a staircase that led to the basement. The group cautiously descended the stairs, the only light coming from their flashlights. They were greeted by an overwhelming stench, a mixture of rot and decay. It was then that they saw the piles of human bones that littered the floor. They were everywhere, in every corner of the room, a macabre reminder of the asylum's gruesome past. As they made their way out of the basement, they were confronted by a ghostly figure, a former patient who had died within the asylum's walls. The ghostly apparition pointed a bony finger at them, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The teenagers ran as fast as they could, but the asylum seemed to go on forever, its endless hallways and twisted architecture designed to keep them trapped inside. They were pursued by more ghostly apparitions, their screams filling the air. Finally, they made it to the exit, the metal doors opening with a screech of metal. As they emerged into the sunlight, they turned back to look at the asylum. They saw the ghosts of its former patients standing at the windows, watching them with empty eyes. Echoes of the asylum. It was a small hospital on the outskirts of town, nestled among the trees and the silence of the countryside. The building had seen better days, but it was still in operation, providing medical care to those in need. The hospital staff were known for their excellent care and dedication to their patients. But as the night fell, the hospital transformed into a place of terror. One night, a young nurse named Emily was working the graveyard shift. It was her first time working at the hospital, and she was already feeling uneasy. As she made her rounds, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of her footsteps echoing down the empty corridors. As Emily was checking on a patient in one of the rooms, she noticed something strange. There was a figure standing in the corner of the room, but it was not a patient. The figure was dark and shadowy, with piercing red eyes that seemed to be staring straight at her. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Emily shaken and terrified. Emily continued her rounds, trying to push the encounter out of her mind. But as the night went on, more strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights flickered and buzzed, and the air grew colder and colder. In one room, Emily found a patient sitting up in bed, his eyes fixed on something she could not see. He was muttering to himself incoherently, but when Emily tried to calm him down, he suddenly screamed and lunged at her. She barely managed to escape the room before he could grab her. As the night wore on, the hospital grew more and more unsettling. Emily found herself constantly on edge, her nerves frayed by the constant sense of danger. It was as if the very walls themselves were alive, pulsing with some malevolent energy that threatened to swallow her up. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Emily made her way to the hospital's basement. She had been avoiding it all night, but something was pulling her down there. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay, and the walls were covered in a thick layer of grime. As she descended the stairs, she heard a low, guttural growling sound coming from somewhere in the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a twisted figure, half man and half beast. Its eyes glowed, and it let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the basement. Emily tried to run, but the creature was upon her in an instant. Its claws sank deep into her flesh, tearing her apart with savage efficiency. And as Emily lay dying on the cold, dirty floor of the hospital basement, she realized the terrible truth. The hospital had always been haunted by something far more sinister than any ghost or spirit. The creature in the basement had been lurking there for years, feeding on the blood of the sick and dying. And now, as Emily lay dying, it had claimed another victim. The sinister diagnosis. There was a hospital that was once known for its cutting-edge medical treatments, but it had long since fallen into disrepair. Many patients avoided it due to the rumors that it was haunted, but there were still some who came seeking treatment for the hospital's rare and experimental procedures. One of these patients was a young woman named Sarah, who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. She had heard about the hospital's experimental treatments and was desperate to try anything that could save her life. Despite the hospital's decrepit appearance and the feeling of unease that settled over her as soon as she arrived, Sarah remained determined to see the treatment through to the end. She was assigned to a private room on the 4th floor, which was supposed to be the quietest and most peaceful area of the hospital. As she lay in bed, Sarah began to notice strange things happening around her. The shadows on the walls seemed to move and contort, and she heard faint whispers in the dead of night. But what really terrified her was the feeling of being watched by something malevolent. One night, while she was dozing off, Sarah heard a sound outside her room. She sat up and peered through the small window on her door. To her horror, she saw a shadowy figure in the hallway. It was too tall and too thin to be human, and it was moving towards her room. Panic set in as Sarah realized that she was completely alone in the hospital with this creature. She tried to call for help, but her voice was barely a whisper. The thing outside her door was now scratching at the wood, trying to break in. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed herself as far back into the bed as she could. The scratching continued for what felt like an eternity until suddenly it stopped. Silence descended on the hallway, and Sarah could hear nothing but the sound of her own breathing. Slowly, she got out of bed and crept towards the door. She peeked through the window again, but this time, there was nothing there. No shadowy figure, no sounds, nothing. Shaken to her core, Sarah spent the rest of the night cowering in her bed, too scared to move or even close her eyes. The next morning, she was eager to leave the hospital and forget about the horrors she had experienced there. But just as she was packing her things, Sarah received a call from her doctor. The treatment had worked, and her illness was now in remission. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, Sarah felt as though she had been given a second chance at life. As she left the hospital and stepped out into the bright sunlight, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. The horror of the previous night was behind her, and she was free to go on living. But as she turned to look back at the hospital one last time, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the fourth-floor window, she saw the silhouette of the same shadowy figure that had terrorized her the night before. It was still watching her, and she realized with a sickening feeling that it had never been a figment of her imagination. The creature had been real all along, and it was still lurking inside the hospital, waiting for its next victim.
We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of horror. We strive to bring you the best in horror entertainment, and we appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of terror. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next story.